Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes.
Where we, break down a piece of literature,
Yeah,
give you the insights you need.
that's right.
hmm
And today we're diving deep into J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye.
A book that sparked a lot of conversations
Oh, yeah.
about adolescence and alienation,
Absolutely.
searching for authenticity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's narrated by Holden Caulfield, this teenager who gets kicked out of his fancy boarding school right before Christmas break.
Yeah, we follow him as he kind of wanders through New York City.
Right.
He's grappling with grief and disillusionment and just the whole messy business of growing up.
Yeah. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, what are the big themes that we're going to be exploring here?
Well, you can't talk about Catcher in the Rye without talking about alienation.
Right.
Holden feels like a total outsider, surrounded by phonies everywhere he looks.
Yeah, and that ties into his obsession with innocence, right?
Oh, absolutely.
He's constantly worrying about becoming one of those phonies himself.
Exactly. And that fear is amplified by his grief over the death of his younger brother, Allie.
Right.
Holden's trying to hold on to this idealized version of childhood, but it's a losing battle.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into the story.
Okay.
We start at Pensy Prep,
All right.
this exclusive boarding school where Holden is clearly miserable.
Yeah.
He can't stand the phonies there, especially his roommate Stradlater.
It's interesting how Salinger uses that word phony throughout the book.
Oh.
It's not just about people being fake or pretentious. For Holden, it's this deeper sense of inauthenticity,
Right.
a disconnect between who people are and who they pretend to be.
Like when he describes Stradlater as this, sexy bastard,
Yeah,
it's not just that he's good looking.
right.
It's that Holden sees him as using his charm to manipulate people,
Exactly.
especially girls.
And that's what really sets Holden off.
Yeah.
Stradlater goes on this date with Jane Gallagher, a girl Holden used to know and clearly cares about.
Right, and he just can't handle it.
No, he can't.
He obsesses over this date, imagining the worst.
Yeah.
And that anxiety just boils over into this fight with Stradlater.
Which, of course, leads to Holden making another impulsive decision.
Right.
Escape from Pensy before he gets officially expelled.
And he does this a lot, right?
He does.
Running away from his problems
Yeah.
instead of facing them.
Yeah, it's a pattern we see throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
He's constantly searching for something better,
Right.
some escape from the phoniness that he sees all around him.
So he hops on a train to New York City, but even then he can't seem to be honest with people.
Right.
Remember that awkward conversation he has with Mrs. Morrow on the train?
Oh, yeah, where he makes this whole lie about needing brain surgery.
It's so uncomfortable to read.
know.
But it also reveals so much about Holden's character.
It does.
He's so terrified of being judged, of being seen as a failure.
So
So he hides behind these masks and stories.
that fear of vulnerability, of letting people see the real him,
Yeah.
it's a major obstacle to him forming genuine connections.
So Holden ends up alone in New York City, feeling just as lost and alienated as he did at Pensy.
Yeah, and he has this string of encounters that just reinforce his cynical view of the world.
Like his awkward date with Sally Hayes.
Oh, yeah.
She just wants to have a fun, typical date.
Right.
But Holden just sees it all as shallow and meaningless.
He does.
He takes her ice skating to a play, but he spends the whole time criticizing everything and everyone around them.
And that scene where he rants about how he hates everything phony.
Yes,
Such a classic Holden moment.
it is.
It's like he's projecting his own inner turmoil onto the world around him.
But isn't there a part of us that can relate to that feeling?
Absolutely.
That sense that the world is full of fake people and empty gestures.
I think that's one of the reasons why this book continues to resonate with readers. Holden's voice, even with all its flaws and contradictions, taps into something universal about the teenage experience.
That feeling of being misunderstood, of not quite fitting in,
Yeah.
of trying to figure out who you are in a world that seems to have all the answers already figured out.
Yeah. And it's not just his peers that Holden struggles to connect with.
Right.
He has these awkward encounters with adults, too, like when he meets up with Carl Luce,
Oh, yeah.
an old acquaintance from a previous school.
Right. They have dinner at this swanky bar.
They do.
But the conversation just keeps getting more and more uncomfortable.
More uncomfortable.
Holden's desperate for some kind of guidance.
Yeah.
But he keeps asking Carl these inappropriate questions about sex and psychoanalysis.
It's like he's trying to shock Carl to provoke some kind of reaction.
Yeah.
But it just pushes him further away.
It's interesting how Salinger uses these seemingly mundane conversations to reveal so much about Holden's inner turmoil.
I know, it's great.
He's not just complaining about phonies.
Right.
He's grappling with some pretty deep existential questions.
And those questions are amplified by his grief over Allie's death.
Right.
He keeps flashing back to memories of his brother, trying to hold on to those moments of innocence and joy before everything changed.
There's that heartbreaking scene where he describes Allie's baseball mitt.
Oh.
Covered in poems written in green ink.
Yeah.
It's such a tangible symbol of Holden's loss.
It is.
Something he clings to for comfort.
Absolutely, and it speaks to his fear of forgetting.
Right.
Of losing those precious memories as he gets older and the world keeps moving on.
You know, one of the things that always gets me about Holden is his yearning for connection. He pushes people away with his cynicism and judgments.
Yeah.
But deep down, he's desperate for someone to understand him.
That's so true.
He's constantly searching for authenticity for people who are genuine and real.
Yeah.
But he's so afraid of being hurt that he sabotages himself at every turn.
Like when he visits Mr. Antolini.
Yes, this former English teacher.
Yeah.
Late at night.
Late at night.
Mr. Antolini seems to genuinely care about Holden.
Yeah, he does.
Offering him advice and a place to stay.
He even warns Holden about this fall he sees coming.
Right.
This downward spiral of despair and disillusionment.
But Holden misinterprets Mr. Antolini's actions.
He does.
Waking up in the middle of the night to find Mr. Antolini patting his head and he freaks out.
Ooh, yeah.
It's such a tragic misreading of a kind gesture.
It is.
Holden's so convinced that everyone's a phony
Yeah.
that he can't even accept genuine care without twisting it into something sinister.
And this incident sends him spiraling even further down.
Right.
It leads him to make a series of increasingly desperate decisions, culminating in his plan to run away from everything and everyone he knows.
To escape to the West.
To the West.
To live as a deaf mute.
You're a deaf mute.
To cut himself off from the world entirely.
It's a radical, almost heartbreaking solution.
It is.
A sign of just how deeply Holden is hurting.
But before he can put this plan into action, he makes one last impulsive decision. To see Phoebe, his younger sister, one more time.
And that decision, that need to connect with someone who truly understands him.
Right.
It changes everything, but we'll have to pick up that thread in the next part of a deep dive.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue our exploration of The Catcher in the Rye. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to our deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye.
We left off with Holden, about to run away to the West to live as a deaf mute.
Right, yeah, a sign of just how desperate he is to escape all the phoniness.
But before he goes full Walden Pond, he decides to see Phoebe one last time.
And this is where things start to shift for him.
Yeah, Phoebe, unlike so many others in his life, really sees him.
She's smart, funny, and fiercely loyal to her big brother.
Their interactions are some of the most heartwarming and insightful moments in the book.
Remember when Holden goes to see her at school and she's furious that he got kicked out again?
Yeah, she calls him out on his negativity, his constant complaining.
But she also gives him money, her Christmas savings.
Oh, yeah.
Because she knows he's struggling.
That scene just kills me. It shows how much Phoebe loves and understands Holden, even when he's at his worst.
And when Holden sneaks into his parents' apartment to visit Phoebe, she shows up with her suitcase, ready to run away with him.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a gut punch.
Yeah, Holden's plan was selfish and reckless. But Phoebe's willingness to follow him anywhere shows just how strong their bond is.
It's a turning point for Holden.
Yeah.
He realizes that he can't drag Phoebe into his mess.
He can't let her sacrifice everything for his, misguided escape.
It's like he finally sees the impact his actions have on others, on the people who truly care about him.
And that's when he starts to soften, to let go of some of that anger and cynicism.
Yeah, he takes Phoebe to the zoo.
Right.
And then to the carousel in Central Park.
That scene with Phoebe on the carousel in the rain.
Oh, it's so iconic.
It is.
Holden watches her go round and round wearing his red hunting hat, and he's just overcome with this wave of pure joy.
It's like he finally finds a moment of peace.
Yeah.
A glimpse of beauty amidst all the chaos.
And he decides to go home to face his problems instead of running away from them.
Yeah.
But the ending is still ambiguous, isn't it?
It is. We don't know what happens to Holden after he returns home.
Right.
Salinger leaves it open to interpretation.
Some critics believe that he has a mental breakdown. Others think he eventually finds some kind of healing.
It's a fitting end to a book that's all about uncertainty, confusion, and the complexities of growing up.
So we've followed Holden through his expulsion from school, his wanderings through New York City, his encounters with phonies, and those fleeting moments of genuine connection.
We've seen him grapple with grief, alienation, and that yearning for authenticity.
But what does it all mean?
Right.
What is Salinger trying to tell us about adolescence, about the human condition?
What resonates most with you about Holden's journey?
We'll be back shortly to explore those questions and wrap up our deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye. Welcome back to Books and Bytes.
We're wrapping up our deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye, and I'm curious to hear your final thoughts.
Yeah, we've seen Holden at his best and his worst, his cynicism, his vulnerability, his longing for connection.
He's explored his alienation, his grief over Ally, his obsession with protecting innocence.
But the book doesn't offer easy answers, does it?
Not at all. And that's part of its enduring power. It leaves us with questions, with a sense of ambiguity that mirrors the complexities of adolescence itself.
One thing that's always stuck with me is Holden's voice.
Oh, yeah.
So distinct, so authentically teenage.
It's what makes him such a compelling narrator.
Yeah.
You can't help but feel drawn into his world, even if you don't always agree with him.
Right. And Salinger's writing is brilliant.
Oh, it's fantastic.
The way he captures the nuances of teenage thought and speech so perfectly.
Remember that line where Holden says, people always think something's all true?
Yes.
It's like he's already figured out the hypocrisy of the adult world,
Right.
but he hasn't quite figured out how to navigate it.
It's such a simple line, but it speaks volumes about Holden's disillusionment.
Yeah.
His feeling that everything's a sham.
And yet there's also a kind of innocence to his cynicism.
Right.
A yearning for something better, something more real.
I think that's why his fantasy of being the catcher in the rye is so powerful.
Oh, yeah.
He wants to save children from the fall into adulthood, from the pain and disappointment he's experienced.
It's a beautiful, albeit somewhat naive aspiration, and it speaks to his deep-seated fear of losing innocence, of becoming one of the phonies he despises.
It's like he's trapped in this liminal space between childhood and adulthood, clinging to the past while also trying to make sense of the present.
And that tension, that struggle to define oneself, is something I think a lot of people can relate to, regardless of their age.
Absolutely. The Catcher in the Rye may be a coming-of-age story, but its themes resonate far beyond adolescence.
It's a timeless exploration of alienation, grief, and the search for authenticity in a world that often feels superficial and meaningless.
And while the ending is left open to interpretation, I find it ultimately hopeful.
Yeah, how so?
Well, Holden chooses to return home to face his problems instead of running away.
And his experience with Phoebe on the carousel suggests a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
A possibility of finding joy and connection, even amidst the chaos.
Maybe that's the most important takeaway from this book.
What do you think that is?
Even in the darkest moments, there's always the potential for redemption, for growth, for finding beauty in the simple things.
The Catcher in the Rye is a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
It really does.
It challenges us to examine our own values, our own search for meaning and authenticity in a world that's constantly trying to define us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what final thoughts do you have about Holden's journey, and what do you think his future holds?
Well, that's something I think we all need to ponder on our own time.
Thanks for joining us on Books and Bytes. Until next time, happy reading.